Welcome, everybody, to the Growing Band Director. I'm honored to have our guest is Professor David DeJesus from State University of New York at Purchase. Great to see you, Dave.
Hey, good to see you. Long time.
It sure has been. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So let's see. I'll start at the very beginning. I started in my musical journey in Brooklyn, New York. Um, my father came from a line of mechanics and was good at working with cars. And there was a timbale player that played in a bunch of Latin bands that lived in the area that needed work on his car. So my dad traded him. Like my dad worked on his car, and he and this guy Johnny Pacheco, Johnny Santana rather, he gave me snare drum lessons. So I started on the snare drum, and I did about 6 months of snare drum before we moved to Connecticut. And we ended up in this town called Norwalk, Connecticut, which had a really good music program. So they had um, like a at a meeting and inviting us to join the band, and I wanted to play the clarinet because my dad said that he played the clarinet. So I'm like, oh, let me do what my dad did. So I signed up for clarinet, and I put saxophone as a secondary. And all of the girls signed up for clarinet, so they put me on saxophone. I guess I had big hands or something like that. So I ended up finding out later that my dad never played the clarinet. He thought the recorder was the clarinet. So it all worked out. So I started the saxophone in sixth grade, and then the summer of sixth grade, going into seventh grade, my grandmother got me a book about my birthday, and it had chapters on famous events in history and famous people born on my birthday. And I'm reading through, and one of the guys that has the same birthday as me is Charlie Parker. So Charlie Parker played the alto. I just started the alto at this time. He was an only child. I'm an only child. He moved around a lot. I moved around a lot. So I felt this kind of bond with Charlie Parker. And so I went to the library because that's what you had to do back then. You couldn't just Google it. And I found a Charlie Parker CD, and it changed my life because before that, you'll remember this guy. Do you remember Brian Hartley?
Very well.
Brian Hartley was the guy I thought the saxophone sounded like. He could play like five major scales, and I thought that's what the alto sounded like. And then I heard Bird, and I was like, game over. So I started, really getting into it. I love the fact that I shared this birthday with this famous musician, and I told my band director at the time, Mr. Belagamba, about it, and he was like, "Oh, you should get the Omni book." So I got the Omni book, and I put two and two together pretty quickly that like what I was seeing was what I was hearing on the recording. So I felt like I had the cheat codes to jazz, and I had that book with me all the time. You probably remember I had my Omni book is beat up. So you had a book. I'm never sure if you wrote that book or not. The Reading Rhythms Right book.
Norman
You
Klaus and
remember
I
that
wrote it.
book?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
you had a
wrote it. Yeah,
so
both.
that book. I'll never, I'll never forget that you would start band class, you would pick a random person and go page six, line three, measure five, count their rhythm. If they couldn't do it right on the spot, they ran a mile or lap at marching band rehearsal. And I was in the best shape of my life in marching band because of all the laps I had to run. But I left your program really solid on 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, and 6/8, I would say. And and that helped me in college when I got to college. So when college came around, you were actually a big part of this because I getting back to sixth grade, my father didn't want me to go into music. So he hands me a saxophone and he's like, "Here you go, have fun, but you can't be a musician." And that didn't mean anything to me. I'm in sixth grade, but I always had it in the back of my mind. And so middle school happens. I'm doing a jazz band and the concert band. We get to the high school. I'm doing marching band, concert band. I make the upper levels of the band eventually. I'm doing jazz band, pit orchestra, everything. And it was kind of a shoe in that I was going to go into music. Everybody thought that, but I always knew in the back of my mind I couldn't be a musician because my dad told me in sixth grade I couldn't. So I had decent grades. So I was looking at schools. I was into creative writing. So Kurt Vonnegut was teaching at University of Chicago. I was looking at that. I had really good math SAT scores, and I applied to Georgia Tech, and I got a scholarship to go to Georgia Tech for mechanical engineering. And you found this out, and I come home one day, and because you were asking like, why are we not going into music? And I'm like, oh, my folks say I can't go into music. So I come home one day, and you're in my living room convincing my folks to let me go into music. And I remember, I walk in, you're in the living room. I'm shocked that you're there, and I guess you guys just finished your conversation, and you just like, Mr. De Jesus, see you tomorrow. And you left, and I'm like, what just happened? And then my folks told me that I could go to music as long as I went to a program that wasn't a conservatory. It was like part of a bigger thing. So I wanted to go to NYU, was the school I wanted to go to. And it's funny, like I'm from Brooklyn, and I just had this idea of like NYU. I didn't even really look into the program. It was just the idea of the thing. And I applied, and I got into the music school. But the way NYU works is you have to get into the university as a whole. And I missed the GPA cutoff by 200. It was a 3.5, and I had a 3.48. So I get a call from David Schroeder, was I think his name was. Um, he's the head of the jazz program at NYU. He's like, go to any school you want for a semester, and we'll get you in as a transfer student, because I guess it was easier to get someone in as a transfer student. So when I was done crying, the only school that was still having auditions was Purchase. And you were really weary of Purchase, because Purchase was this, like, at the time when you knew it, rightfully so, was kind of classical only program. The jazz program was really non-existent, and but I was like, oh well, I'm just going to go there for a semester. I'm not going to live there. I'm just going to do it for a semester and then go to NYU. So I do that, and I remember Jamil. Do you remember Jamil Roberts? Right.
Yes.
So Jamil and I, we skipped school one day to go visit Purchase. And the other thing you were weary about was Purchase at the time was a Bachelor of Fine Arts. It wasn't even a Bachelor's of Music degree yet.
Right.
So so I went over there, and I don't know how I had the gall to do this, but I just like barged into the admissions office. I'm like, hey, what's a Bachelor of Fine Arts versus a Bachelor of Music? And they sat me down, and they're like, well, actually, this fall we're going to be we got accredited to be a Bachelor's of Music program. So I'm like, oh, great. And they're like, do you want a tour? I'm like, sure. So we just like did this tour, and they showed us around the thing, and I was like, okay, I could deal with this for a semester. So I ended up applying, and I'll never forget, my dad saved up 2 years to go to NYU. He thought I was going to get into NYU, and and it and when he found out I was going to Purchase, he saw the bill, and he bought himself an Acura TL type. I remember that. There was such a big price difference, NYU to
Yeah,
Purchase. You know?
sure.
So I get to Purchase with the intent of just being there for a semester. But one of the people I wanted to study with at NYU was Ralph Lalama. I met him at the Silvermine Tavern. Remember the
Right.
Silvermine Tavern?
Yeah.
So the Silvermine Tavern was owned by these parents of another marching band student who were friends with the Village Vanguard people. So they would hire them to do like quartet gigs. So Scott Wenholt and Dick Oates and Ralph Lalama. So I met Ralph, and I really liked Ralph. And I knew he taught at NYU. I didn't know that he also taught at Purchase. So I
Oh,
got him right away. And I found out later that I wouldn't have had him until I was like a senior at NYU, because I found out about this thing with colleges about undergraduate based versus graduate based programs. So Purchase is an undergraduate based program, so they focus all their energy on the undergrads. NYU was focusing its energy on the graduate students. So I ended up studying with Ralph right away. I made the big band right away. I wouldn't have made the big band right away at NYU. And then I found out the practice room situation. Like Purchase has 70 practice rooms with pianos in them, where NYU has like maybe 25 at the time. And they were closets. Like you'd have your back against the wall, and your
yeah.
upright pianos there. You're playing your alto above the keys, so you don't hurt anything. And so I'm like, oh, maybe I should stay here. So I ended up staying for 4 years, and it was the best decision I ever made. It was a young program, so I was definitely one of the more serious people in the program, and I don't know. I mean, I went into school thanks to you and my folks, like really thinking about where's this all going, not just getting good at the craft, but like how am I going to make a living at this? Like one of your concerns was that there was no music ed degree, so it was straight performance. And so I had that in the back of my mind of like I gotta make a living at this. And so common sense just told me like, okay, who knows how to make a living at this in this building? The faculty. So I would hang with the faculty all the time. I would go to lunch with them, it was like a 15-minute walk to get to the dining hall, and I would walk with them and just ask them questions and stuff. I would set up office hours with teachers I didn't even have, and like play duo and just pick their brain. Or I remember John Riley was this famous drum teacher at Purchase. I offered to set up trios for his students so they could hear them in like a group context. So I would like find a bass player, and then I would come in and we would play, and I'd be in the room like kind of during these lessons and learn about John. And John was another career-minded one. He would ask all his students, um, how many employers do you have? Who's hiring you to play the drums? And that got me thinking, do I have? So it was great. I ended up having a really good relationship with the faculty, and so I graduate, took 10 years between all his degrees. So he did his undergrad, took 10 years off, did his master's, did another 10 years off, and did his doctorate. And I thought that was a great path. So I wanted to do that. But I graduate, and let me backtrack a little bit. Between junior and senior year, Manhattan School of Music had this program at Brevard. So the Brevard summer program? It's in North
Yes.
Carolina.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like an 8-week classical thing, and Manhattan School piggybacked off of it and did a 2-week big band workshop. They used their facilities and and all of that, and they brought Justin DeChocho, who's the head of the jazz program at Manhattan School, Dick Goetz, and Micah Benny, and they brought a full big band plus 2 extra trios, and then they would split the big band up into 3 bands of like 4 horns, 4 or 5 horns, and you got to take composition lessons with Micah Benny and lessons with Dick Oates. And so what happened was John Riley, who I was setting up those lessons with, he taught at Manhattan School too, and turns out that Manhattan School needed a lead alto player for this big band, and he recommended me, and they reached out to me and asked if I could do it. So I was like, sure. So I was the only Purchase guy there. It was all Manhattan School people, and that changed my life. That group, because Purchase was good, like building the relationship with the faculty was great, but Manhattan School was a whole nother level of just musicality and like the students and everything like that. And it really opened my eyes to like, oh man, this is where I need to be. And so I graduate Purchase. That was my junior year going into senior year. When I graduate, they invited me back to do this thing, and when I did it that summer, um, Dick Oates and Justin DeChocho were really pushing for me to do my master's at Manhattan School. And I'm like, I'd love to, but it's $80,000. And I'm like, I got off pretty cheap with my undergrad because my entire undergrad cost $30,000,
Yeah.
because I got a $5,000 scholarship through my dad's company, and at the time, living on campus, they had a deal with Fairfield. Purchase had a deal with Fairfield County in particular because we're so close to Purchase,
Yeah.
so it's like almost in state. So my first 2 years ended up costing me $10,000 with living there. So that's
Hmm.
20 grand. And then my junior year, I realized I was never in my dorm. I was either in the practice room or in the city doing sessions or gigs or whatever. So I moved back home because home was only 30 minutes away.
Hmm.
So I lived back home my junior and senior year. Um, so that was 30 grand, and I felt good about we had that all paid off. It was good. So I didn't want to go into debt for this master's. I didn't think I really needed right at the time. But Justin, I knew Justin, because he used to judge like the Greenwich High School Jazz Festival every year.
Yep.
Me. So I'm like, you know what? Fine, I'll pay the $75 and do this audition. I have no intention of really going. But I do the audition. I get a letter in the mail saying that I got a 90% scholarship for the first semester. So I'm like, is this a
Oh.
trap? Is this like, do they get me? And then like second semester, boom, full price.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? If that's the case, I'll just drop out. Like it's jazz. Like tons of people have not finished their degrees and made great careers. And I'll get a semester at Manhattan School of Music for 90% off. So I did it. So I go in, and I found out the way it works at Manhattan School is that you come in with a ranking. It's 1 through 5, and there's a jury every semester, and you get another number at that jury. If your ranking let's say you come in at a 3 and you get a 3 at your jury, you lose scholarship. You have to improve. So you have to go up to 4, right?
Mhm.
So I came are they like dooming me for failure, because like I come in at a 5 and then it's hard to get that, so then I get a 4 and I lose my scholarship. But I ended up getting a 5 every semester, and because once you were at 5, you were able, if you just had to keep getting 5, so I got a 5 every semester. So my entire grad degree ended up costing me $8,000 instead of
Great.
$80,000. So that put me in a huge like advantage with my peers, because I had people that paid full price for undergrad and full price for grad school, and that's a house, and then you're trying to pay for a house with like piecing together $50 to $100 gigs.
Yep.
So I didn't have that. I was scot clear. Um, so yeah, so my as far as teaching goes, so higher ed teaching, Manhattan School is a big part of that, because my second year at Manhattan School, I ended up doing the Latin Jazz Orchestra with Bobby Sanabria. And Bobby, he's a super educator, but he at the time was known for being a hothead. He was like really like hard on all the students and would like cuss at you and just like really dig in, and he was just really passionate, but he was it was a young different time. And so I did the band, and he really liked me. I was the one that would come in early and set up the room, and for the big band, and I knew my music in and out, and I would like help out my section, and he saw that I was like a responsible person. So he asked me, a month in of me doing the band. Um, Will Vincent was he's a great alto player that moved to London now.
Mhm.
Um, he actually moved to London. He was in Bobby's working band. So Bobby's working band needed a lead alto player, and he recommended me to do it. So I was like, great. So I'm a month in of doing Bobby's band, and he asked me to join his working band. And um so he got to really know me. So I was in the school band, and outside we are doing gigs, and he saw me handle myself there. And so so he started sending me in to cover rehearsals for him, because I didn't realize he taught him in hand school, but he also taught at NYU and New School.
Oh, wow.
So he would send me into the sub at NYU and New School. But at NYU, Ralph LaLama. So Ralph sees me walking the halls of NYU. He's like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm subbing for Bobby Sanabria." And he's like, "Oh, can you cover my combo next week?" And I was like, "Great, yeah, sure." Sure. And it's just like getting playing gigs. It's just like this networking thing that, I started like bumping into old faculty that taught at other places. And so I did a few years of like going around. I taught at City College and NYU, New School, and Manhattan School, just kind of subbing random classes for people or subbing lessons or this and that. And so through Bobby's band, I ended up getting into Arturo Farrell's band. So the way that worked was, it's a whole weave of things, but so I'm in Bobby's band, and we're doing a bunch of gigs, and then he's getting ready to make a recording, right? Another recording with the big band. And I found out about the music business. He fires everybody except for me, the lead trumpet player, and the bass player.
Whew.
And then he gets all these ringers to do the album. And I found out, like, when you see like some of these big band albums with all these names like Jeff Coffin and Ron Blake and all these people, they did the recording. They're not necessarily going to do the gigs, but they do the
Right.
recording. So he wanted like big names to do the recording, and a lot of the people that he brought in were from Arturo Farrell's band. So um the music was really sax heavy. He loved like all these crazy rhythmic sax solos and stuff like that, and there's a lot of precise like articulation and stuff. So I had to set up these sectionals with the new sax section, and they're all twice my age. And I'm a young like 20 nothing, and I had to teach these guys about the music, and they were impressed with how I handled myself. And one of the guys, the second alto player, David Bixler, he's like, "Hey, you should sub for me sometime at Birdland." And I've never been to Birdland, and he's like for Chico Farrell's band, and I never heard of Chico Farrell. And I was like, "Sure." So I go, and that started me, like, I subbed a year with Arturo Farrell's band. um, and then, well, okay, there's two stories involved there. So with Arturo's band, I do a year of subbing in the Chico band, and then Arturo was Chico's son. He ran the Lincoln Center Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra, and then was running the Chico band for his dad, who just passed away.
Oh,
So that band played at Berlin every Sunday, but the other band like traveled the world and did all these big things. And I just assumed that the Chico band was like a feeder band for the other band. And so what happened was a year of me doing stuff for Arturo. He asked me to do a week of rehearsals with this project that with his band was doing with Ballet Hispanico. So so I'm like, sure, of course. So I'm doing these rehearsals, and it's a wonderful experience. I didn't realize that it was an audition. So what happened was the second alto player left the band, and they needed a second alto player, and that they wanted to see, when I learned that when you get to that level of band, it's not just about how you play, it's about how you get along with everybody,
yeah.
because they don't do that's killing, that's going to bring the vibe down and be a drag and a complainer and annoying and all of that. So I call it hangability at the college. Like, what is your hangability? And so I was great. I got along with everybody. I knew a lot of people through various gigs that I already did and stuff. And one of the big things was the lead alto player, Bobby Porcelli, who was like, is a legend of lead alto Latin jazz playing. He was Tito Puente's lead alto player for years, worked with Mongo Santa Maria and everybody. And so he was getting up there in years and was just a little like kind of hands on. He needed like a little assistance. And I knew him from Ray Vega, who taught at Purchase. So it's like this whole snowball of how this stuff happens. And so they ended up asking me at the end of the week if I would join the band. So that's how I got into Arturo's band. And that started 10 years of me doing, traveling the world and doing things with Arturo Farrell's band. Yeah. And then, the other thing that happened with the Chico thing that was interesting. So when I graduated Purchase, I went around to every gig in New York. There used to be a book called All About Jazz. I think it's called the New York Jazz Record now.
Yeah.
And at the back of it would have the schedule of who's playing in the city, and I would just sit there with a highlighter and just like see, which gigs I wanted to go see. But they had this one section that was all the weekly gigs, and I learned pretty quickly that weekly gigs are the way to get into the scene. Because a one-off, let's say at the Blue Note, like let's say there's one gig at the Blue Note with some band, you're not going to sub in that because that's the one gig. That band is like there for that thing. Where a weekly gig, people sub out weekly gigs as other things come up. So I went around to every weekly gig and just went around kind of doing research to see if I can handle the gig. So I went to the Vanguard band. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. Like I've been playing those charts for years. I started with you, like with Cherry Juice and all that stuff. And then in college, we would do all the other things. And so I'm like, yeah, could totally do that. And I ended up doing a summer with them, which was great. And
Yeah.
then Mickey's band, I went there. You did Moanin' with us,
Yeah.
and then we did all the other things like Reincarnation of a Lovebird up at the college. And so I'm like, yep, I could do that. And I ended up subbing in that band. I remember I went to see Maria Schneider's band, and Charles Pillow was playing lead alto. He had an alto, a flute, a piccolo, an oboe, clarinet. And I enjoyed the gig, and I never came back because that was a gig I knew I couldn't do at the time. I wasn't playing piccolo and oboe and stuff like that. So I could schmooze all day long and never get into that band because I
Yeah.
didn't. So I was kind of sussing out what I could do. And in this process, there was an alto player named Todd Bayshore he had a big band gig every night of the week, 7 days a week. He had a big band gig, and they ranged from like $15 in dinner to like $100. And I meet him and I introduce myself to him. I let him know that I'm an alto player. I'd love to sub for him, and then he would sub me work. And I did about 3 years of work for him. This is when I graduated my undergrad. So flash forward to when I sub in the Chico band for the first time for that guy David Bixler, who was playing in that band, Todd Bayshore.
There you go.
So Todd was playing second alto, Dave played first alto, so he moved up to first alto. I played second alto for the gig. And the next thing I know, I'm getting these calls for like Christian McBride's big band and Robin Eubanks's big band and Jimmy Heath's big band. And what happened was Todd was calling me for these like kind of down in the dumpster gigs because he just needed someone to cover it. And whenever I did it, no one, he never got a call of complaint or whatever. But he didn't know how I sounded, because every time I did a gig, that meant he wasn't on the gig, so he
Yeah.
never heard me play. So then we do this Chico gig, and he finally sits next to me for a whole gig and hears me play and everything. He's like, "Oh, this guy can handle better things." Because as you move up the chain too, you can't send in bad subs. You got to send subs that can really take care of business.
Right.
Because, I remember I was told you always want to send, if you can, a better sub, because you don't want the band that you're in to be mad at you, like that you sent some chump to like do the gig for you while you're doing this better thing, right?
Yep.
And if you can, make it like memorable, like, man, we missed you, but man, it was so great to play with Steve Wilson or something like that. So I learned a lot of things about that through Todd. And yeah, so it's all a snowball. And I can keep going and going, but
Well,
yeah.
see, I think that you've taught a great lesson, and to all our listeners, especially to the younger listeners. It's all about networking. You've got to network, and the minute you stop networking, you stop working. And you've got to be precocious enough to say, like you said, you went to the magazine, you said, every week I'll go and introduce myself and see if I can get a gig. And you work your way up to the higher level gigs, and now you're the director of jazz studies at SUNY Purchase, right?
Yep.
You run the whole department.
I run the whole thing.
So here's a young man who came into Purchase as a undergrad when it was in the new nebulous beginnings of the program, and now you've grown it to a huge program. And then you're the director of Birdland too, right?
Correct. Yep.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not on the road as much as you used to be now that you're married and you got a family and everything. You got to be home a little bit more often.
I think it's more, I want to be home, that have kids and still go on the road, and I just see those relationships, and um I don't like the sound of them, like their kids, they don't have as strong of a relationship with their kids because they're not around. Like the kids are all about mom who's home all the time or something, and I just didn't want that, and so I made the choice to kind of stay local. And now my son's 10, and he's starting to like not care if I'm home or something like that, just because he's got his own interests. Like he's on the swim team now. He loves video games and reading. So I think like in a couple of years I'll be able to go back on the road again, and he won't mind so much. But I'll say, you said something about networking. There was something else you said. Okay. So I could tell you about the director running these few things, how that came to be.
Well, can
Um,
I just? I have a few. Let me just. We can talk about this a little bit more. I'd like to ask you a few questions
sure, of course, go
about
for it.
teaching because I've got some listener questions for you. Um,
Great.
One of our listeners asked, "What are the standard rhythms played by drums, bass, congas, piano, guitar, in bossa, afro, salsa, and cha-cha? We know what our responsibilities on percussive instruments are in swing, but what about in those styles? Bossa, afro, salsa, and cha-cha."
Wow. Okay. So those are all huge worlds. Bossa, samba, that's from Brazil, and then the other rhythms you mentioned are from Cuba. Those are Afro-Cuban rhythms. Um, and the Afro-Cuban world has clave, so you need to know about clave. And there's two basic kinds of clave. There's son clave and rumba clave. And there's a 3/2 version of each one. I can give you a whole lesson on all of that. And then there's a cascara that goes with each of those. And then samba has a different kind of clave. Um, and their rhythms are a little I mean, the main worlds of bossa and samba are pretty straightforward. Bossa is pretty much just eighth notes, with a type of clave for the cross stick. Um, and then the Afro-Cuban stuff is way more complex. There's a lot of worlds. Cuba, there's three main styles of music that came out of Cuba. There's the danzón, which is the most classically inspired music from Cuba. You have the son, which has guitars where the bongo really fit in, and the huido, all those kind of instruments. They're handheld instruments, and there's a reason for that. They were kind of hiding, so they would have to have portable instruments to be able to like kind of hide them, so people didn't confiscated. And then you have the rumba, which is the most tied to Africa, and that's mainly percussion. There's really not harmony in rumba music. In traditional rumba music, it's typically like unison melody and a lot of different congas going on. And when you see a conguero now, like playing two or three or even four congas in a rumba group, those are each one person. You know, that phenomenon of seeing someone playing a bunch of congas at the same time, that's a matter of finances. You know, this guy Candido Camarera, he was the first one to figure out how to play all of these things on by himself, and then he basically took the work of two other guys. So he was able to, you know, like, oh, you hire one Candido, it's like getting three percussionists. So he would make more money, and they would save money. It was like a financial win for everybody. But you know, I would suggest there's a great book. So Rebecca Maleon, I would recommend. She's got a book called the Salsa Guidebook. She's also got another one called 101 Montunos, if you want to give to your pianists to start checking out Montunos. Um, I think the hardest part about learning Latin jazz is all the terminology and all of these rhythms that if you're off by like an eighth note, it's now a different rhythm, you know, and
Mhm.
it's a different world. So but she really lays down like each instrument's role, and like you know, she goes through the bass, like what a typical tumbao looks like, what the bass player is playing, what some simple montunos are, and with the percussion she goes through all the hand percussion, the clave, the huilo, all of that, and cowbell patterns. But I would say, you know, that book is really good. And the most important thing is getting the students to listen to recordings. So I run at Purchase College the Latin Jazz Orchestra, and I'm aware that these kids did not grow up in Latin jazz. I treat that class. I run both big bands. So I run the Latin Jazz Orchestra at Purchase, and then also I co-run the jazz orchestra with John Faddis. And that jazz orchestra, those kids are familiar with that world of swing. But Latin jazz, they're not necessarily familiar with what mambo is versus cha-cha and all of that. So I treat it more like a class, and we do a lot of listening. And I think about jazz this way, but also Latin jazz is that it's a language. And if you're not familiar with how the language sounds, you can academically learn it all you want. You're never going to sound authentic. So it's like, you know, here in Norwalk, you accidentally hear Spanish all the time. So when you take Spanish in class, you're already ahead of the game because you know how it goes. Where you don't accidentally hear German around here. So if you were to take German in high school, you would, you know, kind of it'd be hard for you because you don't know how that language sounds. And jazz is the same way, but Latin jazz is a whole nother world of that. So I would suggest, you know, Tito Puente is like the cat for all the mambos and cha-chas, and I mean, he did everything. He did every style of Afro-Cuban music, and Afro Puerto Rican music too. So there's Puerto Rican specific music like the bomba and plena. He did all of that. But his whole catalog are all the classic tunes that people will recognize, and they're the most accessible. Like you'll find lots of charts of his music. Then you can get a little deeper and go Eddie Palmieri, who he came from a musical family. Him and Charlie Palmieri were big innovators on the montuno. Um, Another guy is Bebo Valdez, who's Chucho Valdez's father. He has a great album called Bebo de Cuba, and it's a two disc set, and he goes kind of through all the typical music from Cuba. And the last one I'll say is Cachao, who was a famous bass player. He's a big innovator on basically all these people like Bobby Rodriguez and Ruben Rodriguez and Lucas Curtis. All these people are like, they worship Cachao. Cachao's the guy. So he has an album called Master Sessions. There's like volumes 1 and 2. Those are like essential kind of things to check out. So I think it starts with really listening to all of those things, and you can check out those books because yeah, I mean it's a lot of little subtleties with the clave and the cascaras and stuff. The last thing I'll say is to invest in good sounding percussion. So what I did when I took over the Purchase band, so when I started the Purchase band, it was just a few horns and rhythm section. and the guy before me, he would bring in rhythm. He would bring in ringers for the rhythm section. So he'd bring in a professional conguero and a professional pianist to play in the band, right? Um, and I get why he did that, because it's hard to teach, to teach all of that stuff. What's, oops, sorry. Um, so when I took over, I'm like, I don't want to be doing that. So I took that first year and just taught him everything. And then I haven't had to, I basically have had to teach a new person every year. And the way I do it now, we have a full big band and we have an understudy in the rhythm section every year. So we have one person that just sits and watches all the different parts. And when a senior graduates, that person moves up. And and they kind of teach each other, and that person will, that person's a nice backup when someone in the percussion section can't be there, they're sick or something like that. He gets to play, he or she gets to play. And so we kind of have this mentoring thing with the band now. But I took that first year to really teach everybody everything. But getting back to the equipment, the school had congas. They had these Matador congas, which Matador, if you see those, old Matadors are really good. That was actually a company that competed with LP,
Right.
and LP ended up buying them. So old Matadors are really competitive. They're really good. So the school had a set of old Matadors and Matador timbales, so congas and timbales, but nothing else. So I went to this famous Latin percussion shop in the Bronx. It's like in the hood of the Bronx. It's called JCR Bells. And it was where all the salsa guys got their bells. And you'd walk in, and it was just like walls of mambo bells and bongo bells and a go-go bell, any kind of bell you can imagine. And you would just sit there and ding on each bell until you found one you liked. And so I got, because the timbale player needs a mambo bell, which is the big open bell, and they need a cha-cha bell, which is a small tight bell that you play dead stick on. And then they need like a wood block. So I made, I got all top tier stuff for that. And then my bongo cero, I got a nice set of bongos. Funny story with that, I got those on Facebook Marketplace. There was a guy in Long Island selling these top of the line, like $500 bongos for 150 bucks. So I drive out there, and he's like, yeah, I'm like a singer songwriter. I bought this for my percussionist, and they sound awful. And so, it's just easier for me to sell them now, than to try to return them. So I play them, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. They sound awful, uh, so I take them, and I'm laughing on the way home because he never tuned them. So yeah, so I'm on the way home with these bongos, just laughing because he never tuned them. So they were just like, like limp. They sound like boom, boom. So I'm just
Yep.
tightening them up, and they're sounding amazing as I tighten them up, and just laughing my way home. So I got good bongos, and then the bongo settle has his own bongo bell. So I got a good one of those, and all of that, and it was it really wasn't a huge financial commitment, but it did was it made the band sound authentic,
Yeah.
because that's the other thing, is that if you have, and I've heard bands like this, that they they're playing actually the right stuff. They're playing all the right rhythms and everything, but it just sounds rinky dinky because the bells they're using are like, really bad steel and everything, and the claves are tinny. They're like the really high pitch, like marching band clave or something, versus like a thick wooden, like
Yep.
Cuban clave. So so I would say those two things, of getting the students to really listen to this music, to know how it goes, and the sounds. Getting back to the listening, so the way so my experience with Latin jazz is, I'm Puerto Rican. I grew up, my dad's number 13, and at one point we all lived on the same block in Brooklyn. We owned both bodegas on the corner, and a dry cleaners, and a laundromat. And in all of those places, Latin music was playing. So Tito Puente
Mhm.
was playing, Tito Rodriguez, Celia Cruz, everybody. I didn't know that, though. I didn't know who these people were. Now I know. I recognize what that music was, but it was just in the air, and I wasn't a musician at the time. I wasn't like asking, like, oh, who's that? It was just in the air. And so I get to purchase, and junior year, Ray and I make the big band, and he asked if I could do his band. Unfortunately, I had some gen ed thing that I had to do. Same I told him, I was like, "Man, I'd love to, but I've got this stupid class I got to take. I could do it next semester." So he's like, "Okay, cool, no problem. You should come to this gig that I have down in the village every Wednesday." So I go to the gig, and that's where I met Bobby Purcelli. Bobby Purcelli was his alto player, and the band was like all these heavies. It was like Ruben Rodriguez. It was Robert Rodriguez on piano. What's his name? John Benitez on bass, Adam Cruz on drums, Chimbo Cornell on congas, like all the heavies. And I was like, man, and it was $10 and a $2 bottomless cup of coffee. So that became my like weekly hang. I went every week. And it got to the point where I was picking up Ray at his house in the Bronx to take him to the gig and then take him home. And so I mentioned that because but I do that thing with Ray, and then the next semester I end up joining the band, and he was so relieved because I was naturally playing all the things that he was trying to get those students to do, right? And all the other students were, not of Latin descent. So I come in and I'm just playing like all these things, just how I think they should go, and not that I studied it or anything. It's just like it's like, oh, this kind of sounds like this thing I heard once, and it was a lesson there that just really listening a lot, you internalize a lot of things when you listen, and you know how it goes. It's like if someone that listens to like swing jazz all the time, they can't unswing. They'll never play corny because that's their standard of what that music should sound like, and it was the same thing with this. And then when Bobby asked me to join the band, and that was the result of he heard that I played with Ray Vega. He was like, "Oh, if you played with Ray, then you're good to go." Boom. So he asked me. I got into his band, no audition. I just got into the band, and so yeah, I think this the listening thing is really really important.
Well, I think
And
also the thing that you've brought out is that you went in because of your college's proximity to New York City. You could get into the city anytime after classes were over and go listen,
yep.
participate, make yourself known. And I think as kids pick colleges, that's something that they have to take into consideration. If you've talked about the networking requirement for being a good performer, of how to make a living, because you talked about at the very beginning how your dad instilled a thing about business. How are you going to make a living to do such? And you've done above and beyond the call of duty. So let me ask you a quick question. So say we have students who want to go to SUNY Purchase. What do
Yep.
you expect of them as the auditioner of a new fresh kid coming in from a high school to go to SUNY Purchase?
So what we're looking for, the way I think of Purchase is as a training institution, meaning we are trying to prepare you to make a living in music, right? Other programs like Manhattan School and Juilliard, they focus more on the art of it all, right? And that's wonderful, but I just think if you don't teach students how to make a living at this stuff, you can be as artistic as you want, and you're gonna have a hard time surviving. And it's hard. It's harder to survive now than it was even when I came up. I felt that there were more kind of jazz opportunities. Mm. So so looking for people that want to be trained, criticism, right? So you'll have people come in that they're the best from their town, and they know it, and they think that they're going to be the best at the college, and they have this sort of thing about them. I'm not really interested in someone that already thinks they know everything. Like I want someone that is curious about everything, and really wants to learn, and um, but also has signs of like good work ethic and professionalism. And you can tell those people right away. They're the ones, like, they have all the sheet music for the whole rhythm section, and they like shake everybody's hand, and they like know how to count off the tune, like these little things like that we're looking for. And if they're not, some things I look for are sound is a really important thing. Their sound, their feel is the most important, I would say, because if someone let's say someone has a really good feel, but their sound isn't happening. That's much easier to fix than someone that has a really good sound and doesn't swing.
Hmm.
Or you know what I mean? That's a much harder um, thing to learn. So we're looking for that. And yeah, and I typically look for open-minded musicians. So I'll ask my current students, whose gig do you want? Right? And they'll go, what do you mean? I'm like, well, like who like if you could have all their gigs, who would you who would you want to be? And they'll name names like, Sonny Stitt and John Coltrane and stuff. I'm like, Sonny Stitt and Coltrane are long dead. Like you need to know who is alive now, and if they don't know that, um one of two things happens. They'll go, oh, it doesn't matter, those are my heroes. Or they'll go, oh, I need to really check out who's alive because those are the people I'm going to be able to get work from. And those are the people I'm kind of looking for, because if you're really stubborn about jazz already from the beginning, you're going to have a really hard time making a living at this because I can't tell you how many commercial, like non-jazz things I did getting started. And a lot of times those paid a lot more than the jazz gigs, you
Hmm.
know? So like I've done Broadway shows. I was in a band. One of my favorites is I was in a band for a horse. So there was a woman who won this international dressage competition. Do you know the dressage, like the horse dancing kind of thing?
Yes.
And so she was from a country club in Long Island, and she's the first American to win this international competition. So they set up this tour of all these country clubs in Long Island. It was this summer tour, and we had rehearsals with the horse. It was the first time doing the music live because the music was recorded, pre-recorded, and for this like tour, they wanted a live band to play the music that she won this competition with, and it was hilarious because if we were off just a little bit with the tempo or anything sounded different than the recording, the horse would snarl at us, and it was great, like getting the stink eye from like a horse and mad at you. And but the gig, once we got that all down, the gig would basically be we would show up, have hors d'oeuvres with all these fancy country club people, play this 8-minute dressage piece, and then go home with $400 in our pocket. And we did that like pretty much every other day for like a whole summer. It was a great summer. And that was not an ounce of jazz. That was me playing classical, chamber music, for this thing.
But I think that's an important point for our listeners is that a lot of our students come out of high school and they say, "Well, I'm going to play jazz."
Yep.
And they turn down so many simple
Yeah.
gigs, and though you never know who you meet at that gig, and you never know where that gig's going to lead. It's like I play in a clarinet quartet, and we got hired to play a wedding on the top of a hill overlooking Lake Winnipesaukee at 98 degrees. Well, from that gig, 5 or 6 other gigs came that we never even expected to occur, and they were different styles. 2 of them were playing in musical theater. One was
Yep.
playing in a big band, and you learn that through what you've said, and you were always this way even when you were in high school. If there was a gig to play, you didn't care what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I play saxophone? Or do I have to do something else? And you do it, and you learned so many different styles. The young man that I knew in high school to the mature adult man that I know now, you're peeling off all this stuff, and I'm saying that little brain of yours has really sucked up so much stuff. Because when you were talking about the styles for bossa, afro, salsa, cha-cha, and you were saying all these things, and then you gave books to go read. Well, if you really want to be well versed in this subject, you have to do that. And I think a lot of the kids who come out of college, high school, go to college saying, "I'm going to learn to swing," and
Yeah.
it goes far beyond that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
they've got to be willing to learn and try the things. And I think when you were talking about your own studio, well, my drums are over there.
Yeah.
Well, all the former students that I know of who went on to become prominent jazz players can step up to a drum set, can step up to a conga, can step up to piano,
Yeah.
can go to a bass, can go to a guitar, and they can go with a relative degree of success and sit in that section and play. And then they go pick up their trumpet, their trombone, or their sax, and they can blow because
Yeah,
they've
yeah,
learned that they have to know all those different things. And I think what you said about your big band, where you said, I didn't want to bring in subs. I want to have kids learn the styles and play. And then the thing you said, well, there was one person, there's always a person sitting in the background, which is exactly what we did with you when you were in high school. There's always a second drummer sitting in the back, sitting there, and they play a little conga, a little bongo, a little this. And then we talked to them about, well, you can't do this, you can't do this, shouldn't do this. And then we talked about the big thing, and that was the tuning of the congas and the bongos and the timbales and all the other instruments. And that's the biggest thing. And I think that's where band directors need to learn the most is when you use these. I'll use an inappropriate term because I'm not that well versed, but a Latin American style
yeah,
instruments, you need to learn how to tune them and care for it. So you're
yes,
talking about the
correct.
Matadors versus the LPs. Well, you probably don't remember, but I bought all Matadors back when you were in high school because I couldn't
Yeah,
afford the
yeah, yeah,
LPs because they're whack
yeah,
crazy. But I
yeah,
used to do the thing where you put the canister of water underneath the conga
yep,
at night so that it would keep the humidity inside the
yep,
conga
yep,
going.
yep,
And you guys would go home and I'd be sitting there with little dishes of water with a little watering can going around pouring water just to keep them so they would stay
yeah,
so
yep,
they wouldn't splinter. I don't know what the proper term is, but you know, the other thing is that so that's what you expect of your auditionees to come in. Now, on their exit from purchase, you do something, your school does something totally different, which is teaching the kids to learn to market themselves as professional musicians. And I'm sure you get kids that come out of the program that are fantastic. And then there's the kid that needs a little bit more time. It hasn't
yep,
all matured, and you're going to go from there.
yep.
What do you say to the student who needs a little bit more time? They got their degree, they passed all their courses, but it's still not all there. How do you help them move on to the next level? Or do you say, maybe you need to get a master's degree, or maybe you need to consider a different avenue of this profession?
Yep. So that's a great question. So I've done little things in the background before I took over the program. Now that I'm running the program, I can really control the flow of students that are in our program. Meaning, for example, we have freshman and sophomore juries, and those are supposed to be opportunities to remove people from the program. So
Mm.
if someone doesn't do well on a freshman jury, they get a warning. They have to do it again their sophomore year along with their sophomore jury. If they fail those, they're out of the program. We have the ability to remove them from the program because SUNY, the statewide State University of New York system, has this policy that if a student makes it to junior year, that means that you believe in them enough to graduate. So you have to graduate them once they make it to their junior year. But if you can get them out before that, you don't have to deal with that. So, and it sounds kind of, dark maybe, but it's in a kid's best interest if they're not taking care of business at a freshman and sophomore jury, that they have, I lay out the guidelines. They have a whole year to prepare for this thing. If they can't do that, they're in a world of hurt for the future, of the music business, because the music business is a mean animal that you can have all the skills you need and still not work. There's a lot of factors in play. There's nepotism, there's politics, there's a lot of things that are out of your control. And now there's a lot of this, with multimedia, there's like they're trying to diversify bands to fit a certain look. So you may not have the look of a certain band, but can musically play with that band. There's a lot of things, so I mentioned that because there's already reasons not to hire you. So you don't want to then also not be together professionally, as well. You won't stand a chance. It's like we just had auditions at Purchase, and I gave a little presentation about our program, and the title of the presentation was why don't come to Purchase College, like why not come to Purchase College. And number one was don't come to Purchase if you're lazy. And I told all the parents, and as I'll say here, that wanting to be a musician is already a crazy thing. If you're lazy, it's an impossible thing. So you really have to work. And the beauty of it is our work is practicing our instrument, going out and hanging, meeting people, learning different styles of music. This is all like supposedly fun things if you're into music. But it's just you have to really do it. You have to be productive all the time. Um, so now getting back to your thing about people that graduate and are not quite ready to hit the scene, I first asked them if they have a good relationship with their parents. And I mentioned that because if they do, I suggest that they go back home, right? Because some people rush to move into the city. They rush to have the apartment and the roommates and be in the city and pay the rent and all of that. And because they're not ready musically, they end up having to take some regular kind of job. So they'll work at Starbucks, or they'll work at whatever. They'll do, and every time you do that, that is like a nail in the coffin of you not coming out of this as a musician. It's really hard to have a non-musical day gig and keep with music. It's not impossible though. Ray Vega that I mentioned, he worked at a Chase bank. He was a bank teller at a Chase bank while he was playing with the Fania All Stars. So he would like be, when you walk into a bank and it's like, everybody like scurries about like to look busy because it's like nobody was there, and that's like the life of the banker. Like he had a silent trumpet, his silent brass with his trumpet there, and like when no one was there, he would like practice his scales and his Chikowitz and long tones and stuff. And then when someone would walk in, he'd put it down and be like, "How can I help you?" And that's how he paid the bills while he would do these Fania things. But he was really disciplined and pulled out of that, right? For people coming up now, I think it's really hard. Like if you get a 9 to 5, for example, right, to pay the bills, you're working 9 to 5. Your theory is, oh, I'll practice when I get home and I'll do gigs on the weekend, right? But the reality is this: you just worked the 9 to 5, so you're not going to practice right away. You're going to want to have dinner, right? You might even go out with your coworkers because now that's going to be your new friend base. Are these people you work 9 to 5 with? And then you get home, you maybe start practicing at 7 o'clock. You probably got to finish at 9 because you're living in a roommate situation.
Yep.
You can't
Right.
practice all night. And then you gotta, you can't really go do the hang because you got to be at work the next day. So you do that Monday through Friday, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna practice all weekend. But here's the problem: your new social friends that you're with 40 hours a week, that's when they're free and they want to do stuff.
That's
So
right.
now you're picking between like social life or the craft, like trying to become a musician. And it's hard to turn that down. It's always tempting to be involved in like
Yeah.
positive social experiences. So I asked them if they have a good relationship with their parents, because if they can move home, that's really best, right? And I tell them, like, take everything that you learned for these 4 years and get to work, right? And then move to town when you're ready, right? Because and I've had people do it. I had a student go back to Ohio. He kind of he got it together, became like the cat out in Ohio. He actually came back to New York and then realized he actually preferred his Ohio life. Of he was
Mhm.
kind of like the star out there, but he at least tried the New York thing. And I've had other people. The other thing I tell you this is, and I ask all my students this, is something I say: know your idols, right? And what I mean by that is these people that you look up to that are hopefully alive, right? You want to see how they live, right? So I remember first time I did the Mingus band, I was the only sub, and that's like the dream situation. And sitting next to me is Seamus Blake, who I like revered, and he's taking this solo, and I'm just blown away by him. And I come to find out he was in his late 30s. I was in my early 20s, and he was like, I don't know, maybe 30. How old was he? He was in his mid to late 30s, and he had 3 or 4 roommates. And I was like, man, I don't want to be in my late 30s with roommates. So whatever he's doing, I need to do something else. And I started like kind of checking out how these people live. Like, do they live in houses? Do they live in apartments? If they do live in apartments, are they in good neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods? Do they have a car? Do they have kids? I remember one of my early concerns was with alto players. I found that alto players were either divorced with kids or married without kids. And I was like, man, I want to be married with kids. Am I doomed? But I ended up finding people like Mark Gross and Bruce Williams and stuff, and it worked out. But yeah, like Dick Oates was divorced 3 times, has a bunch of kids. Steve Wilson, all these people, So, but I went through the process of like knowing my idols, like learning how they live and stuff. Um, and I mention that because what I tell the students is you want to see how these people live, and if you're okay with that or not. You need to know what you're willing to deal with. Like, are you okay with like being in the trenches for 2 years and really have like I remember, I would teach. When I graduated, well, I actually started working at McMahon, the other high school in Norwalk, when I was a sophomore at Purchase,
Yep.
and that gave me a nice stability when I graduated, because I was doing 4 rehearsals a week. I was teaching private lessons there, so that was a nice financial cushion when I graduated.
And you were
Um,
doing, so the listeners know, you were doing music. You were teaching music when you were at McMahon.
Correct, correct. Yes, yes.
Yep.
I was, yep. So I'll never forget. I was I'm not sure if you remember this story, but when I graduated, so my class was with Jameel Roberts and Miles Lee and Ben Peratt. Like, it was really good music. Like, we're all still playing music, right?
Yes, sir.
And I remember the freshmen when I was in the band was 230 people. And so when I graduated, the freshmen were like, "Oh, can you teach us?" And as a joke, I was like, "Sure," for like $25. And they were like, "Yeah." So I ended up teaching, like 13 kids over the summer. And then some of them had younger siblings, and I would teach their like middle school siblings and stuff. And the fall starts, and you had everybody fill out this form of who they studied with. So they put me down, and you were like, "No, that guy just graduated. Get a real teacher." So they all dropped me. And
Sorry.
but and I can't, all good. It was a good lesson. But the middle school people, they were able to keep studying with me, so I kept like 3 students maybe. But I got the bug. I was interested in teaching. I liked explaining what, because I never took if you remember, I never took private lessons in high school. I would ask all the kids that did take private lessons, like, "What are you working on? What does your teacher have you do?" And I would just do that. So but I never actually took private lessons, so I was interested in the whole process. So I went around, I did a year of, I went around to all the middle schools in Norwalk and in Westchester and stuff. And one of the people that, so I would, this is pre Sandy Hook and stuff, where you could just walk into a school and like go to the band room. And you can always see what the band room is if you look at a school. Like, it's next to the auditorium all the time, so the biggest part of the building, that's probably the auditorium. And I would just walk there, and if they had a class, I would wait and then until it was over. If they didn't, I would just walk in and introduce myself, and I would say, "Hey, I'm a college student at this conservatory. I want to know if I can just do a little demo, like for your students, and you don't have to pay me. I just want to leave some business cards if I could, teach a couple students." And they loved it because they got to go play solitaire for a whole period. And so so people really liked me. This guy Aaron Barkin. Do you remember Aaron Barkin?
Trombone
Was
player.
the Ponus trombone
Yeah.
player? Yep. So he Ponus, and which is funny. I could see Ponus from my house right over here.
Yeah.
Um, but he was at Ponus, and he hired me to work with his jazz band. So I would like give sax sectionals and stuff. And I did a year of that. And he ended up getting offered a high school gig up at Massick.
Yes, he did.
So he left his job at Ponus, and I didn't know this, but he was the assistant band director at Brian McMahon for the marching band. So he recommended me to replace him.
Hmm.
So I get a call from Ron Secchi, and Secchi, I knew who he was because he was the other band director. So he's like, "Hey, Aaron Barkin recommended you to be our new woodwind instructor. What do you think?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's wonderful, but I don't want to do it." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, I hated band when I was in school. I don't want to do it ever again." And and he's like, "Oh, but Aaron recommended you." And I'm like, "That's wonderful, but I don't want to do it." And he's like, "Look, just come on in. I'll talk to you about the gig, and you can decide from there." I'm like, "Okay, but I'm not going to do it." So I come in for this meeting at McMahon, and he's like, "These would be your duties. This is the time commitment, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "This sounds great. I don't want to do it." And he's like, "Well, we'll pay you $50 a rehearsal, 4 rehearsals a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and then you get 2 rehearsals for Saturday because it's competition day." And I'm like, "Great. When do I start?" and because that was $200 a week, that was now $800 a month, out of nowhere. So I was like, great, cool. And then he let me teach lessons at the school, so I would teach like from after school to when marching band started in the evening. So it was a great thing. I did that my sophomore year all the way through. Um, I did that gig for 9 years,
Yeah,
actually.
you did.
Yeah, I was at McMahon. Um, and yeah, and it's interesting, the whole snowball of all of that. With with him, I got hired just as a woodwind instructor, so just to run the woodwind section. Now, when I was in your band, I was woodwind captain, and my woodwind section was 98 people, right? And I get to McMahon, and the entire band is 100 people, like color guard and everything. So I'm like, oh, this is cake. And so, but just the way I am, and I got that from you, this attention to detail. And if I would notice anything wrong, I would try to fix it. And so I'd see people marching wrong, and I'm like, no, it's like this. I'd show them how to do it, because as much as I didn't like marching band, I was a great marcher, and so I knew like how it should go, and so I would fix drill, I would fix marching technique. The color guard, they weren't enthusiastic when they caught the rifles. I'm like, no, you gotta, bam. And then like the drum majors didn't know how to conduct really, so I taught them all the patterns, and we ended up winning best music and best drum majors that year. It was the first awards McMahon like ever got. And because I would run the entire band, I would notice the brass weren't doing stuff, and I'm like, no, you need more air, it's got to sound like this. And so I quickly became assistant band director there, when I was just hired to be the woodwind instructor. And then he knew I did jazz, so he had me work with the jazz band. We started a combo.
Yeah.
And that combo ended up placing second at the Berkeley High School Jazz Festival. And yeah, it's just I think attention to detail. It's not magic how some bands sound better than others. It's just attention to detail. Like, I remember when I started teaching at the college level, people really liked me because they were used to professors being like, "Oh, you're not swinging." That's a kid's not choosing to not swing. It's like they don't know. So I would be like, you're not swinging, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You need to chomp 2 and 4 on the hi-hat, give a little light 4 on the floor of the bass drum, maybe just start with quarter notes on the ride and lock that in with the bass, and then add the skip beat. Like, I'd be able to describe all of this stuff. And it goes back to with Latin percussion. So my story with Latin percussion is I get into Arturo Farrell's band, right? I'm already in Bobby's band. I'm doing Arturo Farrell's band, and I'm playing my parts great. Like, I play all my saxophone parts great. I'm taking good solos, but I don't really know what's going on around me. I don't know the terminology of like, what is a cha-cha versus a mambo versus Mozambique versus rumba, bembe. Like, I'm hearing all these things. I don't know what they are. And I realized, like, my last name's DeJesus. That's not going to change anytime soon. I'm going to be doing Latin jazz forever. I should know more about this stuff. So I started learning percussion. So the bongocero was this guy, Joe Gonzalez, who worked with like he was in Mario Baza's band, and he worked with Tito Rodriguez, everybody. And I played second alto in Arturo's band, so I could just stare at him and not really worry about like leading the section. Like when we were like not playing, I could kind of look at this guy. He used to sit right behind me, and I got my bongos, and I would bring them to rehearsals, and on like set breaks and stuff, I'd be like, "Hey Joe, is this how it goes?" And he's like, "No, it's like this," and then I did a year of like just like him like kind of giving me these little lessons, right? And it got to the point where like he'd be like, "Yo, David, show the martillo on the bongos," and the cats would be like, "Oh man, check him out." So I did a year of that. I did a year of congas with Chembo Cornell. I did a year of timbales with Vince Cherico. I actually really like this process of learning a new instrument, like at a high level, because it humbles you. Like
Huh?
when you are proficient at your one instrument, it's easy for you to forget how hard it is for students learning that instrument. Like, oh, what do you mean? You just do this, boom. And with learning these other instruments, you're like starting at ground zero, even though you know all this stuff. You're starting from kind of ground zero, and I like that process. So I think it makes me a little more empathy by like learning these new instruments.
Yeah, I think
And yeah,
I think you've explained a lot of really good things, but I think the most important thing you've brought forward is that if you want to get good at this, you got to do it. You got to research it and you got to listen to it. And if you don't do those three things, you're never going to get, you're never going to become anything different than what you were. Like when you were in high school, you played jazz well and you played Latin even better. And when we do a Latin tune, I always knew just let David play, it'll be fine. Just don't worry about it. But you had been brought up listening to that. And I never realized that I knew about you in high school setting. I didn't know you were originally from a bodega area in Brooklyn, and you had all that history that came with you. And it's made you such a great teacher. Now we're going to have to end this section. What do you want our listeners to remember? The most important things that you want them to know as the professor that runs the jazz study programs at SUNY at Purchase, as a consistent performing jazz, Latin, Afro-Cuban, whatever style you want performer, a person who plays musical theater on the Broadway stages, and a person who is I guess your name is, you're the manager of Birdland?
So I'm the director of the Birdland Big Band is what I do.
Right.
But
So
I'm involved in the club a lot because I also help with booking and things like that at the club too.
So what are the things you want? Because we're mainly talking to a high school, middle school, and elementary school band directors. What do you want them to remember? Because your whole talk about Brian McMahon and how you got into the thing through private lessons, through being helping out. Give us the words of wisdom that's going to lead us forward to hopefully have another David DeJesus come out of our ranks in the future.
I think the number one thing is the work and putting in the time. There's really no substitute for it. So when I was in high school, I practiced all the time. And now it was a side effect of like I didn't do any sports, like because I came to Norwalk late, and the sport culture, like if you don't start baseball when you're like 3 years old or whatever, you're out. And I remember like I wanted to join the wrestling team when I was a sophomore, and they're like, nope, you need to start as a freshman. It's a 4-year training program, and tennis, and so sports were out the window for me. And I just had music, and I would practice. My parents didn't want to hear me practicing when they got home from work. They had like stressful jobs, so I had to practice like as soon as I got home before they got home, so that I had like maybe 4 hours of like practicing, and then I would do my homework and stuff. And so I think it takes work. It's a lot of like sleepless nights and really hustling. I remember like I would work a full day with like the marching band at McMahon. I'd be there at like 6 a.m. to get on the bus to travel to the gig, and then like rehearse them all day, do the competition, and on the way home I'd find out about some gig of some alto player I really needed to check out, and I would like pound my coffee and go do the hang until like 2 a.m, and then like, teach lessons all day Sunday. And like my day today, I was up early with my son. I have a little routine with him in the morning. I'm with him for like about 2 hours. So we have a little trumpet lesson every morning because I play the trumpet too now. And I teach him the trumpet, get him ready for school, drop him off, came here, set up my studio. After this, I got to go into Purchase to cover some classes for some professors that are out. I have some students that are coming because now that people have been accepted, they want to come and take tours to learn more about the program if they haven't done so already. So I've got a bunch of tours I'm giving, and then I've got to run my own actual classes because I'm covering other people's classes during the day. And then I do my own classes until about 8 o'clock at night. Then I head over to the rock climbing gym so I could get in some rock climbing, indoor rock climbing, so I could stay fit. And then I'll come home and work on, I teach a class called Science of Happiness at the college. So I got to prepare for those. It's a lecture to like 40 kids on music and correlation of happiness. There's a lot of technical studies and stuff. It's a cool class. But I always it's a kind of procrastinating, but I also I like to do it like the day before, so it's super fresh in my mind. So when I give the presentation, I'm not just reading off of like a PowerPoint presentation or something. It's like organic. So but as a result, I have like a stressful night the night before, but it's cool. It's a successful class. And yeah, just go. Every day is full. Like my college students see my schedule and they're like tired just looking at my schedule, and it's like, yeah, if you want it all, you got to do it all. Like if I just wanted to be single and have a little apartment and do gigs, I wouldn't have to do what I do. But I wanted a house, I wanted a family, I wanted a nice car. It's like I want all those things, so I got to put in all the work.
Yeah, well, you are a gregarious individual that I am very proud to know and to have watched grow through the musical field. And we thank you very much for joining us. And is it okay if our listeners have questions, if I could refer them to your email so they could ask the questions?
Totally.
All right. So if any of you folks want to have a chat with Dave, you let me know and I'll send you his email and you can work out something with Dave to talk with him. Professor David DeJesus, it is a pleasure to talk with you, and I wish you the very best in your future comings.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.